Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 695th night, she resumed, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the maiden said to Husan al-Khaliah, when my lover saw me playing as I described to thee with Siran's girl, he went forth in anger. And 'tis now, O Sheikh, 3 years ago, and since then I have never ceased to excuse myself to him, and coax him, and crave his indulgence. But he will neither cast a look at me from the corner of his eye, nor write me a word, nor speak to me by messenger, nor hear from me aught." Quoth I, "Hark, maiden, he is an Arab or an Ajam?" And quoth she, "Out on thee! He is of the Princess of Bassorah." "Is he old or young?" asked I, and she looked at me laughingly and answered, "Thou art certainly a simpleton. He is like the moon on the night of its full, smooth-cheeked, and beardless, nor is there any defect in him except his aversion to me." Then I put the question, "What is his name?" And she replied, "What wilt thou do with him?" I rejoined, "I will do my best to come at him, that I may bring about reunion between you." Said she, "I will tell thee on condition that thou carry him a note." And I said, "I have no objection to that." Then quoth he, "His name is Samra bin al-Mughara, Hight Abu al-Sakah, and his palace is in Murbad." Therewith she called to those within for an ink case and paper, and tucking up her sleeves, showed 2 wrists like broad rings of silver. She then wrote about the Basma as follows: "My lord, the omission of blessings at the head of this my letter shows mine insufficiency, and know that my prayer has been answered, that thou hast never left me. For how often have I prayed that thou shouldest not leave me, and yet thou didst leave me. Were not that distress with me exceeded the bounds of restraint, that which thy servant hath forced herself to do in writing this writ were an aidance to her, despite her despair of thee, because of her knowledge of thee that thou wilt fail to answer. Do thou fulfill her desire, my lord, of a sight of thee from the porch as thou passest in the street, wherewith thou wilt quicken the dead soul in her. Or far better for her still than this, do thou write her a letter with thine own hand. Allah endow it with all excellence, and appoint it in requital of the intimacy that was between us in the nights of time past, wherewith thou must preserve the memory. My lord, was I not to thee a lover sick with passion? And thou answer my prayer, I will give to thee thanks, and to Allah praise, and so the peace." Then she gave me the letter, and I went away. Next morning I repaired to the door of the Viceroy Mohammed bin Suleiman, where I found an assembly of the notables of Basra, and amongst them a youth, who adorned the gathering and surpassed in beauty and brightness all who were there. And indeed, the Emir Mohammed set him above himself. I asked who he was, and behold, it was Zamra himself. So I said in my mind, "Verily there hath befallen yonder unhappy one that which hath befallen her." Then I betook myself to the Murbad, and stood waiting at the door of his house till he came riding up in state, when I accosted him, and invoking more than usual blessings on him, handed him the missive. When he read it and understood it, he said to me, "O Sheikh, we have taken other in her stead. Say me, wilt thou see the substitute?" I answered, "Yes." Whereupon he called out a woman's name, and there came forth a damsel, who shamed the greater lights, swelling-breasted, walking the gait of one who hasteneth without fear, to whom he gave the note, saying, "Do thou answer it." When she read it, she turned pale at the contents, and said to me, "O old man, crave pardon of Allah for this that thou hast brought." So I went out, O commander of the faithful, dragging my feet, returning to her, asked leave to enter. When she saw me, she asked, "What is behind thee?" And I answered, "Evil and despair." Quoth she, "Have thou no concern of him? Where are Allah and his powers?" Then she ordered me 500 dinars, and I took them, and I went away. Some days after I passed by the place, and saw their horsemen and footmen, so I went in, and lo, they were the companions of Zamra, who were begging her to return to him. But she said, "No, by Allah, I will not look in his face." And she prostrated herself in gratitude to Allah and exultation over Zamra's defeat. Then I drew near her, and she pulled out to me a letter in was written after the Bismillah. My lady, but for my forbearance towards thee, whose life Allah lengthen, I will relate somewhat of what betided from thee, and set out my excuse, in that thou transgressed against me, whenas thou wast manifestly a sinner against thyself, and myself, in breach of vows and lack of constancy, and preference of another over us. For by Allah, on whom we call for help against that which was of thy free will, and thou didst transgress against the love of me, and so the peace. Then she showed me the presents and rarities he had sent her, which were of the value of 30,000 dinars. I saw her again after this, and Zamra had married her. Quoth Al-Rashid, had not Zamra been beforehand with us, I should certainly have had to do with her myself. And men tell the tale of Ishak of Mosul and his mistress and the devil. Quoth Ishak bin Ibrahim al-Masuli, I was in my house one night in the winter time, when the clouds had dispread themselves, and the rains poured down in torrents, as from the mouths of waterskins, and the folk forbare to come and go about the ways for that which was therein of rain and sloth. Now I was straitened in breast, because none of my brethren came to me, or could I go to them by reason of the mud and the mire. So I said to my servant, bring me wherewithal I may divert myself. Accordingly, he brought me meat and drink, but I had no heart to eat, without someone to keep me company, and I ceased not to look out of windows and watch the ways till nightfall, when I bethought myself of a damsel belonging to one of the sons of Al-Mahdi, who I loved, and who was skilled in singing and playing upon instruments of music, and said to myself, were she here with us tonight, my joy would be complete, and my night would be abridged of the melancholy and restlessness which are upon me. At this moment, one knocked at the door, saying, shall a beloved enter in who standeth at the door? Quoth I to myself, meseems the plant of my desire hath fruited. So I went to the door, and found my mistress with a long green skirt wrapped about her, and a kerchief of a brocade on her head, to fend her from the rain. She was covered with mud up to her knees, and all that was upon her was drenched with water from gargoyles and house spouts. In short, she was in sorry plight. So I said to her, O my mistress, what bringeth thee hither through all this mud? Replied she, thy messenger came and set forth to me that which was with thee of love and longing, so that I could not choose but yield and hasten to thee. I marveled at this. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 696th night, she said, it hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the damsel came and knocked at Ishak's door, he went forth to her and cried, O my lady, what bringeth thee hither through all this mud? And she replied, thy messenger came and set forth to me that which was with thee of love and longing, so that I could not choose but yield and hasten to thee. I marveled at this, but I did not like to tell her that I had sent no messenger, wherefore I said, praise be Allah for that he hath brought us together, after all I have suffered by the mortification of patience. Verily, hast thou delayed an hour longer, I must have run to thee because of my much love for thee, and longing of thy presence. Then I called to my boy for water, that I might better her plight, and he brought a kettle full of hot water, such as she wanted. I bade pour it over her feet, whilst I set to work to wash them myself, after which I called for one of my richest dresses, and clad her therein after she had doffed the muddy clothes. Then, as soon as we were comfortably seated, I would have called for food, but she refused, and I said to her, art thou for wine? And she replied, yes. So I fetched cups, and I asked me, who shall sing? I, O my princess. I care not for that. One of my damsels? I have no mind to that either. Then sing thyself. Not I. Who then shall sing for thee? I inquired. And she rejoined, go out and seek someone to sing for me. So I went out in obedience to her, though I despaired of finding anyone in such weather, and fared on till I came to the main street, where I suddenly saw a blind man striking the earth with his staff and saying, may Allah not requite with well those whom I was. When I sang, they listened not, and when I was silent, they made light of me. So I said to him, Art thou a singer? And he replied, Yes. Quoth I, Wilt thou finish thy night with us and cheer us with thy company? And quoth he, If it be thy will, take my hand. So I took his hand, and leading him to my house, said to the damsel, O my mistress, I have brought a blind singer with whom we may take our pleasure, and he will not see us. She said, Bring him to me. So I brought him in and invited him to eat. He ate but a very little, and washed his hands, after which I brought him wine, and he drank 3 cups full. Then he said to me, Who art thou? And I replied, I am Ishak bin Ibrahim al-Musalai. Quoth he, I have heard of thee, and now I rejoice in thy company. And I, O my lord, I am glad in thy gladness. He said, O Ishak, sing to me. So I took the lute by way of jest, and cried, I hear and I obey. When I had made an end of my song, he said to me, O Ishak, thou comest nigh to be a singer. His words belittled me in mine own eyes, and I threw the lute from my hand, whereupon he said, Hast thou not with thee some one who is skilled in singing? Quoth I have a damsel with me. And quoth he, Bid her sing. I asked him, Wilt thou sing when thou hast had enough of her singing? And he answered, Yes. So she sang, and he said, Nay, thou hast shown no art. Whereupon she flung the lute from her hand in wrath, and cried, We have done our best. If thou have aught favor of us with it by way of an alms. Quoth he, Bring me a lute hand, hath not been touched. So I bade the servant bring him a new lute, and he tuned it, and preluding in a mode I knew not, began to sing, improvising these couplets. Clove through the shades, and came to me in night so dark and sore, the lover wetting of himself, 'twas trysting tide once more. Not startling us, but her salam, her first word, she said, May I, beloved, enter, who standeth at thy door? When the girl heard this, she looked at me askance, and said, What secret was between us? Could not thy breast hold for 1 hour, but thou must discover it to this man? However, I swore to her that I had not told him, and excused myself to her, and fell to kissing her hands, and tickling her breasts, and biting her cheeks, till she laughed, and turned to the blind man, and said to him, Sing, O Lord. So he took the lute, and sang these 2 couplets. Ah, often I sought the fair, how often lief and fain my palming felt the fingers' ends that bear the varied strain, and tickled pouting breasts that stand firm as pomegranates twain, and bit the apple of her cheek, kissed o'er and o'er again. So I said to her, O my princess, who can have told him what we were about? Replied she, True. And we moved away from him. Presently, quoth he, I must make water. And quoth I, O boy, take the candle and go before him. Then he went out and tarried a long while. So we went in search of him, but could not find him. And behold, the doors were locked, and the keys in the closet, and we knew not whether to heaven he had flown, or into earth had sunk. Wherefore I knew that he was an Iblis, and that he had done me pimp's duty, and I returned, recalling to myself the words of Abu Nawas in these couplets. I marvel in Iblis such pride to see, beside his low intent and villainy. He sinned to Adam, who bowed, refused, yet pimps for all of Adam's progeny. And they tell a tale concerning the lovers of Al-Medinah. Quoth Ibrahim, the father of Ishak, I was ever a devoted friend to the Barmecide family, and it so happened to me one day, as I sat at home quiet, alone, a knock was heard at the door, so my servant went out and returned, saying, A comely youth is at the door, asking admission. I bade admit him, and there came in to me a young man on whom were signs of sickness, and he said, I have long wished to meet thee, for I have need of thine aid. What is it that thou requirest? Asked I. Whereupon he pulled out 300 dinars, and laying them before me, said, I beseech thee to accept these, and compose me an air in 2 couplets I have made. Said I, Repeat them to me. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 697th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the youth came in to Ibrahim, and placed the gold in his hand, saying, Prithee, accepted and composed me an air of 2 couplets. He replied, "Recite them to me." Whereupon he recited, "By Allah, glance of mine thou hast oppressed my heart, so quench the fire that burns my breast. Blames me the world because in him I live, yet cannot see him to enshroud I rest." Accordingly, quoth Ibrahim, I set the verses to an air plaintive as a dirge and sang it to him, whereupon he swooned away, and I thought he was dead. How after a while he came to himself and said, "Repeat the air." But I conjured him to Allah to excuse me, saying, "I fear lest thou die." "Would heaven it were so," replied he, and ceased not humbly to importune me till I had pity on him, and repeated it. Whereupon he cried out with a grievous cry, and fell into a fit worse than before, and I doubted not but that he was dead. But I sprinkled rose water on him till he revived and sat up. I praised Allah for his recovery, and laying the ducats before him, said, "Take thy money, and depart from me." Quoth he, "I have no need of money, and thou shalt have the like of it, if thou wilt repeat the air." My breast broadened at the mention of the money, and I said, "I will repeat it, but on 3 conditions. The first, that thou tarry with me and eat of my victual, till thou regain strength. The second, that thou drink wine enough to hearten thy heart, and the third, that thou tell me thy tale." He agreed to this, and ate and drank, after which he said, "I am of the citizens of Al-Medinah, and I went forth one day a-pleasuring with my friends, and following the road to Al-Kak, saw a company of girls, and amongst them a damsel, as she were a branch pearled with dew, with eyes whose sidelong glances were never withdrawn, till they had stolen away his soul who looked on them. The maidens rested in the shade till the end of the day, when they went away, leaving in my heart wounds slow to heal. I returned next morning to scent out news of her, but found none who could tell me of her. So I sought her in the streets and the markets, but could come no trace of her. Wherefore I fell ill of grief, and told my case to one of my kinsmen, who said to me, "No harm shall befall thee. The days of spring are not yet past, and the skies show signs of rain. Whereupon she will come forth, and I will go out with thee, and do thy will." His words comforted my heart, and I waited till Al-Akik ran with water. And when I went forth with my friends and kinsmen, and sat in the very same place where I first saw her, we had not been seated long before up came the women, like horses running for a wager. And I whispered to a girl of my kindred, "Say to yonder damsel," quoth this man to thee, "he did well, and spoke these couplets." She shot my heart with shaft, then turned on heel, and flying dealt fresh wound and scarring wheel. So she went to her, and repeated my words, to which she replied, saying, "Tell him that he said well, who answered in these couplets, The like of whatso feelest thou we feel, patience, perchance swift cure our hearts shall heal." I refrained from further speech for fear of scandal, and rose to go away. She rose at my rising, and I followed, and she looked back at me, till she saw I had noted her abode. Then she began to come to me, and I to go to her, so that we had foregathered, and met often, till the case was noised abroad, and grew notorious, and her sire came to know of it. However, I ceased not to meet her most assiduously, and complained of my condition to my father, who assembled our kindred, and repaired to ask in marriage for her of her sire, who cried, "Had this been proposed to me before he gave her a bad name by her assignations, I would have consented, but now the thing is notorious, and I am loath to verify this saying of the folk." Then continued Ibrahim, I repeated the air to him, and he went away, and having acquainted me with his abode, we became friends. Now, I was devoted to the Barmecides, so next time Ja'far bin Yahya came and sat and gave audience, I attended, as was my wont, and sang to him the young man's verses. They pleased him, and he drank some cups of wine, and said, "Fie upon thee, whose song is this?" So I told him the young man's tale, and he bade me ride over to him and give him assurance of the winning of his wish. Accordingly, I fetched him to Ja'far, who asked him to repeat his story. So he did so, and Ja'far said, "Thou art now under my protection. Trust me, to marry thee to her. So his heart was comforted, and he abode with us. When the morning morrowed, Ja'afar mounted, and he went in to Al-Rashid, to whom he related the story. The Caliph was pleased with it, and sending for the young man and myself, commanded me to repeat the airs and drink thereto. Then he wrote to the governor of Al-Hijaz, bidding him dispatch the girl's father and his household in honorable fashion to his presence, and spare no expense for their outfit. So in a little while they came in, and the Caliph, sending for the man, commanded him to marry his daughter to her lover, after which he gave him 100,000 dinars, and the father went back to his folk. As for the young man, he abode as one of Ja'far's companions, till there happened what happened, whereupon he returned with his household to Al-Medinah. May Almighty Allah have mercy upon their souls, one and all. And they also tell, O auspicious king, a tale of Al-Malik, Al-Nasir, and his Wazir. There was given to Abu Amir bin Marwan a boy of the Christians then whom never fell eyes on a handsomer. Al-Nasir, the conquering Soldan, saw him, and said to Abu Amir, who was his Wazir? Whence come this boy? Replied him, From Allah. Whereupon the other, Wilt thou terrify us with stars and make up prisoners with moons? Abu Amir excused himself, preparing a present sent to him with the boy, to whom he said, Be thou part of the gift. Were it not of necessity, my soul had not consented to give thee away. And he wrote with him these 2 couplets. My lord, this full moon takes in heaven of thee new birth, nor can deny we heaven excelleth humbleth earth. Thee with my soul, and I please, and oh, the pleasant case, no man e'er saw I who to give his soul preferreth. The thing pleased Al-Nasir, and he requited him with much treasure, and the minister became high in favor with him. After this, there was presented to the Wazir a slave girl, one of the loveliest women in the world, and he feared lest this should come to the king's ear, and he desire her, and the like should happen as with the boy. So he made up a present still costlier than the first, and sent it with her to the king. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease the telling of my tale for today, till it be morrow.